The night she handed me that envelope, she had a smile on her face that didn't reach her eyes. I noticed that. I've always been good at noticing things people wish I wouldn't. It was a Tuesday in February, one of those damp, gray evenings where the cold gets into your bones even if you're sitting inside near a heater. My son had made pasta, or tried to, anyway. Boiled noodles with jarred sauce, the kind that comes in a red can with a gold label. I remember that detail clearly, because I was thinking, as I sat at that dinner table, that 36 years ago I taught him how to make my mother's marinara from scratch. Onions, crushed tomatoes, a bay leaf, 2 hours on low heat. Somewhere along the way he forgot. My daughter-in-law pushed the envelope across the table toward me. "We've been doing some thinking," she said, in that careful voice she used when she'd already made up her mind about something and was just going through the motions of involving me. About the future. My son didn't look at me. He was moving his fork through his pasta like it was something that needed to be stirred. I picked up the envelope. Inside was a brochure, glossy paper, photographs of smiling white-haired people, playing cards and doing chair yoga. Sunrise Gardens Senior Living Community, Clearwater, Florida. Private rooms, starting at $400 a month, activities calendar included. "We thought you'd like the warm weather," my daughter-in-law said. I set the brochure down on the table. I looked at my son. He finally looked up, then quickly looked away again. "I see," I said. That was all I said. I excused myself after dinner, told them I was tired, went upstairs to the room I'd been living in for the past 2 years. Since my wife passed and I'd sold the house on Elm Grove Drive where we'd raised our children, the house I paid off in full. The house that funded half the down payment on the place my son and daughter-in-law were sitting in right now, eating jarred sauce. I sat on the edge of my bed, and I didn't cry. I was past the age where things like this made me cry. I just sat there and I thought. And I thought for a long time. Let me tell you something about my life, because this story won't make sense unless you understand where I came from. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the county. Not glamorous work. Bridges, drainage systems, road surveys. Early mornings, late nights, paperwork that would make a younger man's eyes cross. My wife worked as a bookkeeper for a dental practice for 22 years. We were not wealthy people, but we were careful people. We put 15% into my pension from the day I started. We paid extra on the mortgage every month. We drove cars until the wheels wanted to fall off. When my son was born, we started a college fund the same week we brought him home from the hospital. When my daughter was born 3 years later, same thing. Both of them graduated debt-free. That wasn't luck. That was 30 years of decisions. After my wife got sick, it was pancreatic cancer, and it moved fast, 6 months from diagnosis to the end. I spent everything I had left on making sure her last months were comfortable. Home care nurses, the good medications, a hospital bed with a mattress that adjusted so she could sleep without pain. I don't regret a dollar of it. But when it was over, I was 63 years old, living alone in a 4-bedroom house, and my son called me one evening and said, "Dad, why don't you come stay with us for a while?" I thought it was kindness. My daughter lived in Portland with her family, and we'd talked about me moving closer to her. But my son was here, 40 minutes away, and the offer came first, so I sold the house. I paid off the remaining $47,000 on their mortgage as a thank you for having me. I gave them $15,000 for renovations, a new kitchen mostly, because my daughter-in-law had wanted to update it for years. I told myself, this is how family works. You take care of each other. 2 years later, she was handing me a brochure about chair yoga in Clearwater. The next morning I came downstairs before either of them was awake. I made coffee, real coffee, the kind I bought myself and kept on the second shelf, because my daughter-in-law bought the cheap pre-ground stuff that tasted like cardboard. I sat at the kitchen table and I looked at the backyard through the sliding glass door. There was a bird feeder out there that I'd put up in October. A pair of cardinals came every morning. I watched the cardinals and I drank my coffee, and I made a decision. I was not going to Sunrise Gardens Senior Living Community. I was not going to a private room, starting at $3,400 a month to play cards with strangers and do chair yoga, while my daughter-in-law repurposed my bedroom into whatever it was she had in mind. A craft room, probably. She'd mentioned a craft room. I was also not going to fight about it. I was 65 years old and I had spent my entire adult life solving problems quietly and carefully, and I was not about to change that now. I pulled out my phone and I called my old friend Vic. We'd worked together at the county for 15 years before he retired. He'd gone into property management afterward, and he knew every inch of real estate within 30 miles of here. "Vic," I said, "I need you to show me something, today, if possible." "What are you looking for?" he said. I told him. There was a pause, then he laughed, not unkindly. "You sure about that?" "I've been sure about it since approximately 8 o'clock last night," I said. The house directly across the street had been sitting empty for 4 months. The owner had relocated to be closer to her grandchildren in Ohio and had priced it a little high, which was why it hadn't moved. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a 1-car garage, a covered porch that got the afternoon sun. The carpet needed replacing and the kitchen was original 1987. But the bones were good. I'd looked at enough structural assessments in my career to know when a building was solid. Vic and I walked through it that Thursday afternoon. I stood in the front bedroom on the 2nd floor, the one with the window that looked directly across the street at my son's house, and I stood there for a long moment. "Well?" Vic said from the doorway. "What's she asking?" He told me. I countered in my head against what I knew the house was worth. There was room. "Tell her I'll pay cash," I said. "Full closing in 30 days. I want it as is, no repairs negotiated." Vic looked at me for a moment. "You got the liquidity for that right now?" I did. The sale of our house on Elm Grove Drive had left me with a solid cushion, and my pension was reliable. I'd been careful my whole life. That's the thing about being careful. Eventually it gives you options. "Make the call," I said. I didn't say a word to my son or daughter-in-law. Not that week. Not the next. My daughter-in-law brought up Sunrise Gardens again at dinner one Sunday. She'd called them, she said, and they had availability. And didn't I want to at least go for a tour? The weather in Clearwater was so nice in March. "I'll think about it," I said. My son nodded along. He'd become very good at nodding along. I called my attorney the following Monday. Her name was Barbara, and she'd been handling my family's legal matters for 15 years. Wills, the house sale, everything. I told her I needed to update my estate documents, and I needed to do it quietly and quickly. "Quietly how?" she said. "I mean, I'll be making some changes that affect my son's expected inheritance," I said. "I'd like those changes to be in place before anyone knows I'm making them." There was a professional pause. "I see. Are you being pressured in some way?" "I want to make sure." "I'm not being pressured," I said. "I'm making a free and clear decision based on available information. I just don't want to have a dinner table argument about it before the paperwork is done." "Understood," she said. "Come in Thursday." I updated my will. My son's share was reduced significantly. The bulk would now go to my daughter in Portland, and to a charitable remainder, trust that I'd been meaning to set up for years, a scholarship fund at the engineering school where I'd gotten my degree. I also set up a separate account for my grandchildren's education, structured so that the funds would go directly to the universities, not through their parents. It was not done in anger. I want to be clear about that. I sat in Barbara's office, and I signed those documents, and I felt very calm. I felt the way I used to feel when I'd finished a particularly complex survey, like the numbers had finally resolved into something true. The closing on the house across the street happened on a Wednesday. I arranged for the movers on a Friday, while my son was at work and my daughter-in-law had her weekly lunch with her mother. I had not accumulated much in 2 years of living in their guest room. Some furniture I'd kept from Elm Grove Drive, my books, my tools, the good kitchen equipment, the bird feeder. I left a note on the kitchen counter. It said, "I appreciate your hospitality these past 2 years. I found a place of my own. I'll be in touch." I did not tell them where. I spent that Friday afternoon unpacking boxes in my new kitchen. It was a good kitchen to unpack in. South-facing windows, decent counter space, room for my coffee maker and my cast-iron pan, and the bread box my wife had brought from her mother's house in 1987. I put the bread box on the counter by the window and I stood there for a moment with my hand on it, and I allowed myself a minute. Just one. Then I went and put up the bird feeder in the backyard. My son called at 6:47 that evening. I know the exact time because I was just sitting down to dinner, a real dinner, pasta with my mother's marinara that I'd spent 2 hours making that afternoon. "Dad, where are you? Are you okay? We came home and your room is." "I'm fine," I said. "I found a place." "What place? Where? What are you? Why didn't you say anything?" "You were busy," I said. "I didn't want to bother you." A pause. I could hear my daughter-in-law's voice in the background, asking questions. "Dad, we were worried. Can you tell us where you are?" "I'm settled and I'm comfortable," I said. "I've got your number. I'll call you when I'm ready to have a conversation." I hung up and ate my dinner. The pasta was good. Better than I'd made in a while, actually. Something about having my own kitchen. I didn't call for 9 days. I know that sounds cold, and maybe it was. But I needed those 9 days. I needed to wake up in the morning in my own space, make my own coffee on my own schedule, go to bed when I chose without wondering if the sound of the television was bothering anyone downstairs. I needed to remember who I was when I wasn't a guest in my own family. I went to the library. I volunteered 2 mornings a week at the food pantry at St. Michael's, which I'd done before, and had stopped when I moved in with my son because it felt complicated to have my own schedule. I had lunch with Vic on Thursday. I went to my doctor for my annual physical and found out my blood pressure, which had been running high for 2 years, was back in normal range. I did not think that was a coincidence. On the morning of the 9th day, I was sitting in my upstairs bedroom, the one with the window, drinking my coffee and reading the paper, and I saw my daughter-in-law come out the front door across the street. She walked to her car, and then she stopped. She looked across the street at my house. I don't know what made her look. Maybe she'd seen movement. Maybe it was just instinct. I raised my coffee cup in her direction. Just a small gesture, the way you'd acknowledge a neighbor. She stood absolutely still for a moment. Then she got in her car and drove away very quickly. I finished my coffee. I thought, well, that's settled then. My son came to the door that evening. He rang the bell, which I thought was a good sign. He didn't knock the way you knock on a family member's door, but he also didn't try to just walk in. I let him in and offered him coffee. He sat at my kitchen table. He looked around the house slowly, taking it in, I suppose, trying to understand. "How long have you been planning this?" he said. "Since February," I said. "Since the brochure." He was quiet for a moment. She said you'd be happier. Somewhere with people your age. Activities. I'm aware of what she said, Dad. "Let me ask you something," I said. I kept my voice even. I'd been thinking about how to say this for 9 days. "When your mother and I paid off the rest of your mortgage, do you remember that conversation? What I said to you?" He looked at his coffee cup. "You said it was what family does." "That's right. And when we gave you the renovation money, what did you say to me?" He didn't answer. "You said, 'Dad, this is your home too, for as long as you want.'" I let that sit in the air for a moment. That was 22 months ago. He looked up. He looked older than I'd been thinking of him. He was 41 years old, and he looked it right then in my kitchen. "I know," he said. "I know. She has a way of I don't always." He stopped, pressed his lips together. "I should have said something when she brought out that brochure. I should have said something then." "Yes," I said. "You should have." We sat with that for a while. I refilled his coffee. "The house across the street," he finally said. "You own it." "I own it." "How did you even that fast?" "I paid cash," I said. "I've been careful with money my whole life. Comes in handy." He made a sound that was almost a laugh but wasn't quite. "I can't believe you're right across the street. I can come and go from my own property whenever I choose," I said. "Same as anyone." He nodded slowly. He understood. "My son has always been smart. The problem was never his intelligence." "Is there anything? Can we fix this?" he said. I looked at him for a long moment. "This is my son." I changed his diapers and taught him to drive and sat up with him in the emergency room at 2 a.m. when he broke his collarbone in high school. I am his father, and I will be his father until I'm in the ground. But I was also 65 years old, and I had learned, finally, late, the way you learn the most important things, that love does not require you to disappear. "We can have a relationship," I said, "but it will be on terms that work for both of us. That means I have my own home, my own schedule, and you treat me the way you would treat any person who matters to you. Not as a problem to be managed. Not as a line item." He nodded. He nodded for a long time. "As for your wife," I said, "that's between the two of you. But if she wants a relationship with me, she can come to me. Not through you directly," he said. He understood. He went home about an hour later. I stood on my porch and watched him cross the street. He went inside and the door closed, and the lights were on in the living room window. I went back inside my own house and locked my own door behind me. It's been several months now. My daughter-in-law has come across the street twice. The first time she was stiff and formal and clearly working from a script she'd prepared in advance. The second time was a little easier. We are not warm. We may never be warm, but I've made my peace with that. My son comes for dinner on Sunday evenings. I make real food. Last week it was pot roast with carrots and potatoes, a recipe from my wife's mother that takes all afternoon. He ate 2 full plates and helped me with the dishes afterward. We talked about his job, about a trip he's thinking of taking, about the cardinals at my bird feeder. We did not talk about brochures or senior living communities, or what his wife thinks I should do with my remaining years. My daughter flew in from Portland last month and stayed in my guest room for 5 days. She cried when she saw the house. "Dad," she said, "this is so like you." I didn't know exactly what she meant, but I took it as a compliment. I have a good doctor, a regular Tuesday at the food pantry, Thursday lunches with Vic. My blood pressure is normal. I sleep well. I wake up in the morning and I make my coffee and I read the paper in the window that looks across the street, and sometimes I see the lights come on over there, and I think, I am close enough to matter and far enough to be myself. That is exactly where I intended to be. My wife used to say that the difference between a wise man and a foolish one isn't what happens to them. It's what they do next. I think about that every morning. I drink my coffee, the cardinals come to the feeder. I'm doing just fine.